Is there a story that you're telling yourself that no longer fits for where you are relationally? I think a lot of us have stories about our families, where we're from, how we were raised, the job we have, the school we went to. We have narratives that either get put on us without us asking, or they're narratives that we want to live into or step into as we go throughout life. But I think what's really hard is if there's sometimes a story that you want or wanted that no longer fits for your life, how do you navigate through that?
Yeah, yeah. And so often this ties to our core beliefs, our basic psychology, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about the world, how we think we should exist in the world, the standards we put on ourselves. And there's so often that I'm speaking with clients who I realize, like, wow, it's so apparent that you're locked into this view, this
Mhm.
story, this view, this idea that's keeping you in sort of this very narrow understanding of yourself or your potential or the opportunities around you. And it's keeping you stuck. And it's really
Yeah.
not helpful.
And sometimes it, is just a personal thing of just you, your identity. But a lot of times the story affects your marriage, your work, your role as a parent, son, daughter, neighbor, friend. And so I think that it's really important to sometimes reevaluate and step back and say, what are the stories that I'm living into or operating in that feel like they no longer fit? And that I need a pattern switch or a change to either allow myself to live into a new story or to create a new story, one that feels more aligned and better for where I am now.
Yeah. And you just read a book, right, on story branding and by
Mhm.
this awesome guy.
Yeah, Donald Miller, some of you might know he's out of Nashville and has this incredible marketing company, and his brand is StoryBrand, helping people
Yeah.
figure out the story of their companies, their brands. And so it's a beautiful book that I just finished, just helping companies and people think through how do you talk about your story? How do you talk about who you are in the world, how you operate, what's your purpose, how do you serve people? And so I've just been thinking a lot about this idea of story and what happens in life in your own journey with you as the hero and this
Mm.
arc of your life when there's a left turn or a path that you have to take that you weren't anticipating or a path that you realize you want to take but you didn't think you wanted. And I think that when I'm working with clients who are in a tough spot in relationship, whether they're thinking about divorce, they're going through divorce, dating after divorce, like who am I and who am I in relation to other people, to the people I'm dating, to my spouse? I think it's a really tough thing if you are asked in your own hero's journey, the own story of your life, that like do to take a different story. Like do you have, are you able
Yeah.
to think outside and literally let your brain rewire to allow yourself a different path?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I just recently had a client who deals with anxiety and had this kind of interesting epiphany moment in session. For the individual, they realize that they feel kind of basically a constant level of anxiety, an
Mm-hmm.
inability to be happy. Really, that's what it boiled down to. So even if they were with their family or friends, their brains were always thinking, I've got more to do. I've got to get back to
Mm-hmm.
work. I've got to do my work. And so it's kind of fun to dissect with them, like to help identify like, what's the core element of this and where does it exist and where can it be edited. And it was interesting because they identified like, well, I've got friends who work more than me, friends who are busier than me, and I work a lot, but the people who are busier than me. And I was like, okay, what's the difference? What's the core difference? They're like, I don't know. They can play golf or they can, relax and do different things. And I said, do you ever find yourself relaxing? Can you ever get to that relaxing place where you're able to turn off that
Mm-hmm.
message? You should be working right now. And he said, yeah, really, at the end of the day, for about an hour or so, I can watch a show, just kind of like sit down, watch a show, watch a game, and check out. And I said, genuinely, like that's the only place. And we explored around that a little bit. I said, what about when you make love with your wife? He's like, oh yeah, no, I can be present in that. So okay, cool. So we know there are two areas or moments in your life that you are locked in on. I can be here. I'm
Mm-hmm.
relaxed. I don't feel burdened. And rather than be able to say like, okay, I know how we can fix it all, what the great epiphany was is realize if you experience it in one category, if you know your true self, your story, your ideal, you'll get haunted by these negative messages that are anti-story, that it can be transferred. And so then I said, what can we do to take that energy that you possess, where you're finally able to relax at the end of the day, or being intimate in your marriage, and say, okay, I know this is in me. I know this is a part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I know it exists within me. The potential is there. The reality is there in those small windows. So if we know it exists, then hypothetically we can transpose it to other areas of life to feel a higher level of joy, satisfaction, or presence in other elements of life. And
Mhm.
so we're just kind of beginning to crack that nut. And the first nut of it was helping him identify clearly these, my word, anti-story, or these negative messages that were counterproductive to who he wanted
Yeah.
to be as a healthy, happy, whole person, to at least begin to say, okay, what does it look like to start to reshape your experience with this new idea?
Because was his pervasive overriding story is that I'm an anxious person and I have to live in, 95% of my life, I live into the story that I'm just an anxious person.
Yeah. Well, I'm an anxious person, and then specifically in terms of I've got to make money and
Uh-huh.
I've got to work.
Yeah.
And like that really is the core, the crux of his existence.
Yeah.
And so it was really wonderful, first of all, to give him reprieve because he came in pain. He came in pain. He's like, what is wrong with me? I literally can't turn this off. Like, no, you can turn it off. And we found these windows you can do it. All we need to do is now start to be the architects of how we can,
Yeah.
experience it differently.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most powerful things that Mark as a therapist and myself as a coach can do is like give someone a pattern shift, like just a way to see something a different way and a new, honestly, eventually it's ideally a new neural pathway literally in your brain, shifting the way you say something or look at yourself or the framework of the story that you're living in. And I had a client in the last couple years, a guy that came to me who went to, Ivy League undergrad, Ivy League business school, had been married for 20 years with 3 kids and, had been pretty unhappy in his marriage. They tried counseling, they tried some different things. He's made requests and they sort of got to a point where his wife was just kind of like, hey, look, like I am who I am. Like I'm not changing. Like, you know who I am, sort of like make your choice. And she, I think, was sort of hoping that he was just going to suffer through her unwillingness to adapt, to grow, to change, edit her behavior at all. And I think he was afraid that the story of being someone who leaves his wife or gets divorced was like not a story he wanted to live into or have because, when you have, it's a blessing and a curse to have epic pedigrees and jobs and status in life because then you have these stories that I'm not someone who gets divorced. I'm not someone who pursues personal happiness because that's selfish or that's not the right thing to do as a man, a father, a colleague, or whatever, son. And so a lot of the work he and I did was saying like, but what if it is okay? Like, like because then I think for some people, for so long, myself included, when I was in divorce contemplation, if you've got this lock of, and I think you felt this way too with divorce of like, not an option, not an option, not a story. That's not a story that's available to me that I could leave a marriage, be happier than I am right now in partnership that I could have a different life, have a different story. Like it wasn't available. And then all of a sudden it's like, a crack in the ceiling where you're like, but what if it is available? Like what if that story doesn't have to be this horrible story? I'm a divorced guy or I'm a divorced woman. And what if the more powerful story that erupts out of that crack is joy, bliss, happiness, contentment, a lack of unsettledness, and so a lot of the work that that client and I did together was like, what if it's okay if like that is your story? Because what if the story becomes more epic? Like, what if it's actually a better story than the story you're living right now? And yes, you will have to give up the cost of I'm divorced. And that's a big deal in society for a lot of people. It was for me. I didn't want to be
Mhm.
divorced. That feels like it still has such a scarlet letter A of like, oh, shame. And, you didn't make it your whole life married to the same person. But some of what I see as my most critical work is giving freedom, giving people the freedom and allowing them to say, no, like I think I want a different story and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, but then the key word there that I love is the word empowerment. And so what we realize is we feel beholden, we feel trapped in our life. This guy, anxiety, this person, in a unhappy marriage situation. By opening the paradigm of like we can change the direction of our story, we can change the narrative. We're the authors of our story. We're the architects of our lives. Once we realize that, we then realize we have the ability to make changes. And what it does is it can empower somebody to say, what changes do I need to make? And then potentially empower a relationship to say, what do we need to do to come to the table in authenticity, in transparency, and have sort of an objective reality of analysis. Who
Hmm.
are we? Where are we at? Is this working? Why isn't this working? What could we do to make it work? Or if it's not going to work, what do we need to do this as tactfully and humanely as possible? And all of those become an option of empowerment
Mhm.
versus just I'm bound. I am just stuck in this reality
Yeah.
and
I'm
I can't
stuck
move
in the
forward.
story that I'm in, and I don't have an option out. There's not a doorway to another story or another version of the life that I'm living. And I think the reality is, for most of us, like that's just not true. Like you can always pick a different story. You can go through a different door. You can take a left turn. And I think,
Yeah.
as you were talking, babe, I was also thinking of like when you're working with a couple that's maybe wanting to stay married, but they're just in a tough spot. I mean, another way we get really stuck in stories in a bad way is my story about you. Like, what's my story about my partner or my husband that they always do this or they never do this or they're so selfish or they're so thoughtless or careless or whatever. So I would say a lot of what our work is, you especially with couples and me with couples sometimes, is like, what is the story that one of you has about the other that you've got to release and be open to writing a new story about your partner?
Yeah. 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 Again, back to the crux of, in my opinion, healthy psychology, healthy worldview is in what ways am I viewing my story, myself, or my relationship or my situation? In what ways am I viewing it as, crystallized and solidified versus empowered? And what changes can I make? What changes can we make? And that's really the hope that I think we both share. That's why there's such a rad synergy when we work together. Our hope is that we want people to feel empowered to take the reins of their lives
Hmm.
and the reins of their life for a life of fulfillment, not a
Hmm.
life of destruction, not a life of selfishness
Yeah.
or destruction or woundedness or pain, but to say how do we move through pain to a better sense of enlightenment,
Hmm.
joy, satisfaction. And sadly sometimes that does mean moving away from a situation or a circumstance or a
Hmm.
relationship, but it often can mean moving up in that. And so, yeah, hopefully there's an openness. And I guess maybe just the heart level is wherever you're at, please take the time to look deeply, into your life. Who are you? What parts of your story are you excited about and celebrate and joyful? What part of your story do you feel pain and anguish? And some of that is our existential lot. Like there's some just life pain that we live with. I'm sorry, there is. It's just a reality. And I can think of a number of cases where it's like, no, no, like little answer is going to take away the loss of that loved one or whatever it might be. So there's some existential pain, but who am I in this life? Who am I in this story? And I hope that that's an empowering message to say we can be and become so much more than we are. And that's what we're trying to do. That's who we're trying to be as people and as a couple. That's what we're trying to help our lovely clients move through and move into because we really feel like it's a calling and a passion that we share.
Yeah. One last thought. I just remembered Lori Gottlieb is an author out of LA, a therapist. She wrote Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. She's got a great quote where she talks about the fact that as humans, we're a lot of times we're actually unreliable narrators of our own story. Like we actually are telling ourselves the wrong story. Like, well, because I'm the oldest daughter, I have to do this, or because I'm the minister's daughter, I've got to do this, or because I'm the, veteran's son, I've got to do this, or I have to behave in this way. And so I just was thinking about that too, in terms of like, yeah, that's also a great way to think about how a therapist or a coach successfully works with clients is like, we help you be better narrators or excuse me, editors of your own story of just like, no, like I don't think that's the actual story about your life. Like you think it's this, but it's like actually this. And so I think, people can get swirled up and stewed in the wrong story or the wrong what's the word I'm looking for? The wrong version of a story
Mhm.
because we can so often be unreliable
That's right.
narrators and editors of our own stories. And it really, I mean, that's where if you're in a tough spot, I know different seasons when I've been in real crisis, it's so helpful to have a third party objective source, especially one that, is not your friend or your mom or your sister or neighbor, colleague.
Yeah.
Because then that person can really drop into your life and speak wisdom really objectively because they don't, it doesn't matter to them who's at Thanksgiving dinner or like what happened Saturday night at the dinner party or whatever, like they're like, hey, this is how I see your story. And I'm just trying to help you edit it, narrate it a little bit more what close to what I see as a objective truth.
Love it. Yeah. How do you feel about the casual look today?
Looks
Little
great.
this is the casual look
This is
today.
work, Mark. This is
I've
work,
got
Mark.
some manual labor after this, and
He's
so decided to come in casual. So thanks for
he's heading out to the
tolerating me.
cornfields. No,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
yeah,
kidding.
yeah. Getting some work done.
Awesome.
Very cool. Well, cool. Let's write awesome stories, babe.
That's right. All right. See you guys next time.
Thanks. Bye.